technical animator role. I've worked on a lot of games in my career, some very small, like Doritos Crash Course. Maybe some of you have played it. Voltron for PlayStation. Had a lot of fun making them. And then I've worked on some bigger games as well. For example, Dead by Daylight. A lot of Dead by Daylight. So I know a thing or two about making monsters move. But, we're all here to learn about VR stuff, of course, too. And I've worked on some VR titles as well, such as Creed Rise to Glory Championship Edition, as well as Alien Rogue Incursion, which was nominated for Best VR Game of the Year for 2025. We didn't win, but honestly, I'm just humbled to be nominated to begin with. All right, so some of you are watching right now and probably wondering, what the heck is a technical animator? Why is there a tiger here? And what the hell is an Alien Rogue Incursion? And I know some of you are asking that because the numbers show people didn't play that game that much, but that's okay. But don't worry, all those questions will be answered during this panel. Now, some of you probably might know what a technical animator is. Maybe you think they're the rigger guy, or the bone wizard, or the Majra Mogger, or the keeper of Python. And what I would say to that is, well, yes, but actually no. So setting up character rigs and things like that is a part of the job, but it's not the only part. The technical animation umbrella, or AnimTech, is a very large umbrella term, and we go over a lot of different things. We work inside of digital content creation, softwares like Blender, which I'm sure a lot of you who make avatars for VR chat know that. We also work in Maya, 3D Studio Max, Motion Builder, Soft Image. And if you know what Soft Image is, you're also UNC status. Look, I don't make the rules. Don't worry, I'm right there with you. Nobody remembers Soft Image though. That was a sad software. But then we also do work inside of engines as well. We work inside of Unity, which is where we are now. VR Chat is powered by Unity. Also work in Unreal and Godot. Great engine, by the way, open source. If you like Blender, you'll probably like Godot. Highly recommend it. Now, I just threw out a lot of terms, a lot of information, and a lot of you are probably thinking, what the heck? I came here to see monsters moving, and we're already on the 5th slide, and this sounds like a bunch of nerd talk. And I would say you are absolutely right. This is going to be a lot of nerd talk, as I have tricked all of you, including the staff, as the real title of this panel is, You've All Been Tricked into Learning Math. And with that, I'm sure we just lost half a Twitch chat. But don't worry. Let's be honest. Math is the real monster. It truly is. There's not much scarier stuff than math sometimes. I see chat. No, math. Don't worry. We'll cover it very high level. There's going to be no test by the end. Okay, so let's break it down a little bit more of what a technical animator is and what we do to make these monsters move. Generally, we kind of break it down into about 9 categories, some of them in the DCC software and some of them in Engine. This involves rigging, tooling, pipeline, animation state logic, post-process systems, locomotion systems, which that's the bread and butter, procedural animation systems, sorry, a little stammer there, claw simulations, and rigid body systems. And you can see that's a lot of information up there. That is a lot of info. Don't worry, I'm going to break it down piece by piece. So we're going to get into all of it by the end of this. I expect everybody to have bigger brains by the end of this presentation. Okay, so digital content creation, or often referred to as DCC, is pretty much broken down into 3 categories. You have rigging, which is building the armature and the controls for the animator so they can puppeteer the characters that they want to. Those who do work inside of Blender making avatars, you're probably very familiar with this stuff, building out armatures. Then we have tooling. Tooling is basically just trying to make the artists' lives easier, including ourselves. Rigging is complex. We want to do it faster, so we'll write tools sometimes to make our own lives easier. And then there's pipeline. Pipeline is a lot like tooling, but we try to think about the flow of information because obviously, if you're making a very cool xenomorph, head punching animation, it can't just live inside of Blender or Maya. It needs to go into the game engine. And that usually falls on the technical animator to get that over there. All right, so let's get a little bit deeper into it now. Let's just put a narrow lens on rigging. So I mentioned the armature, but there's actually a lot more that goes into it than just laying down some bones. we have the rigging, we have the skinning, we have control systems, which is the interface the animators work with, and then we have the procedural systems, which is a kind of like a weird layer in between your controllers and your bones, because you don't want your animators animating on bones. That's you're going to have a bad time. You're going to have a bad time with that. Okay, so the rigging. Let's get into those bones that I mentioned. So as you can see here, we have an actual xenomorph. This was actually the xenomorph from Alien Rogue Incursion. This is the actual armature. And when you're building out your rigs and you're laying down your bones and you want that monster to move, you got to think about several different factors. One of them being the hierarchy. I know that seems obvious, but you got to think about it, right? You want to make sure that the wrist is connecting to the elbow is connected to the shoulder. If you have a weird hierarchy that doesn't make any sense, like your neck bone's connected to your pelvis, you're going to have a bad time. So you got to think about your hierarchy structure. Next is joint orientation. Now, this is kind of a weird one. The best way I can describe it is you want to make sure that if you have a chain of joints, that the orientation is consistent from parent to child. Basically, this ensures that, let's say, I'll use my finger here, for example. Let's say, like the knuckle of the joint here is pointing in an x-axis, so its side axis is y. You want to make sure every joint down the chain has that same orientation. The reason why is when animators go to select these finger joints, they're only going to want to rotate one axis, the y-axis. So that way when they curl it, the finger does a nice little point like that. So this is thinking about that joint orientation. It's really, really important. And it'll save you a lot of headache down the road when you set up IK systems. Next is bend direction. Another thing that's kind of important for IK systems, as you want to, we're all VR enthusiasts. IK is pretty important to how we move around. So you want to add a little bit of bone bend direction in your limbs. For example, here in the knees, you can see in the xenomorph, we put a little bend in the knees, as well as in the ankles, because it's a paradigious leg. Hope I said that word right. And basically, this helps with the IK solvers. It helps make it smoother, because if you have a limb that's fully straight, even if you have like tentacles that are like fully straight, unless you're doing a spline system, your IK will not know where to bend, and it'll be weird. You'll have a bad time. Next are helper joints. Helper joints is a really nice system. You can see here in the Xeno, it has several helper joints here in the shoulder to help maintain volume and mass as the shoulders articulate. We also put helper joints here in the wrist to prevent candy wrapping. Don't worry, I'll explain more what that means during the RBF panel, or RBF slide. So, putting these joints in here to help maintain the mass, the volume, making sure your creature feels like it's actually made of flesh and bone. The helper joints help a lot with that, hence the name helper joints. And then the last thing is your bind pose. This is the silly argument a technical animator will ever get into. This is like your typical A-pose, T-pose or A-pose. Sorry, I just hit my IRL chair. And basically, it doesn't really matter which one you do. They both have their advantages and disadvantages. It's just whatever you decide for your project. If possible future game developers watching this, just be consistent throughout the whole project is the only thing I'd recommend with that. T-pose superior to A-pose. I see we already have a technical animator in chat. Amazing, beautiful. Okay. I mean, T-pose is really good, but you have to worry about gimbal lock. I won't get into that because that's a whole panel in itself. Okay, next is the skinning. Skinning is pretty straightforward. You're just assigning vertices to your bone weight. You want to make sure you do a good job with this, so that way, if your limbs are bending, they're not, crushing into themselves. It's not bending in a weird way. This is really important to keep that volume and shape. And there's a number of different techniques to do it. You can see here, I like to use a color mapping system, like a heat map almost. So blue being like super low weight, white being like 100% weight. Anyone who's thinking about getting into technical animation work, just letting you know, there's only two camps. Those who absolutely love skin weight painting, who find it super zen, putting on a podcast, and those who absolutely hate it, and there's no in between. I don't make the rules. That's just how it is. Yeah, I love and hate weight painting. See, the chat gets it. Chat gets it. Okay. Control rig. Control rig is the interaction area for your characters. This is what the animators will be seeing at the end of the day. You don't want them animating on bones. Bones have a hard time in DC software if you animate directly on them. It's always recommended to build a control rig system. You get a lot more access to different type of transforms, offset systems. And if we build it in Maya, software I'm used to using, we generally build it with NURB control rigs. The reason why is it doesn't render when you do like a final frame shot. They're invisible, so it doesn't require any extra work when you want to see it in a nice quality. And they're just very easy to work with. Plus, you get to color code them. It makes it much easier for the animators to work with it. And they're generally very small. Like they don't have a large pixel width, so they don't obstruct the silhouette for the animator. Okay. Next is the procedural system. This is the layer that lives in between, I mentioned before, your armature and your controls. And this is where the real meat of doing technical animation work on DCC side lives. So this is where you're building like your RBFs, your twist joints. You can see here, actually, this is the control rig from the Spirit. I had a lot of fun rigging up this character. Here in this clip, I'm featuring the floating elbow. Part of the art direction was limbs would float away, but they still had to animate and articulate as if they were part of the whole body. So I built this system here where you can basically pull off any body part anywhere you want, and it will still animate together as a whole. Animators had a lot of fun. Actually, I wish I could just spend like an hour talking about the Spirit. It was a very fun rig to do. But yeah, this is where like all the bells and whistles kind of live. Okay, next up, we have a clip coming. Okay, so that takes care of all the rigging aspect. Next is tooling. Now, I'm not going to bore you too much with tooling because it's basically a lot of Python code. And let's be honest, you'd all fall asleep if I just started doing a lecture on Python code. But just to give the long and short of it, you're going to be doing things like building like pose libraries and animbots and tween machines that basically just help speed the animator's workflow. And we also build things for ourselves too to speed up the rigging workflow, like MGear and Advanced Skeleton. That really helps. Like we try to systemize these procedural systems. But I love Python. I love Python too. Python is really good. Matter of fact, that's an IRL picture of me working on a day-to-day basis on building tools. I'm just tapping away. This cat is tapping away on the keyboard all day. Next is pipeline flow, but that data flow. So much like tooling, except you'll be working probably with C++ or C#, depending what your depot is. If you use like GitHub or Perforce, you kind of know what a depot is. And it's a lot like tooling. You'll be building things in mind to help users, but it's kind of a different mind flow. You're thinking about folder directory systems. You're thinking of validation systems. Basically, you want to make sure that, if you're working in a large team of like 300 to 500 animators, you want to make sure that they're all kind of submitting work the same way. You don't want one person doing FBX and another in another file format. So validation tools are very useful like that. So you are still writing tools, but it's just kind of like, hey, this needs to work in a larger pipeline flow. Hence the name pipeline. Okay, and going to the next slide. Oop. Looks like we have a little technical difficulty. There we go. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay, so that pretty much covers all of the DCC side. Now we get to go into my favorite domain. I mean, I like DCC, but I really love doing the engine work. So we're going full steam ahead into it. Also, I have to be totally transparent. I spent way too much time photoshopping a xenomorph into that Back to the Future image. I don't know if you can. I don't know if it's coming up on stream, but just that little Xeno going, Okay, so engine side, let's get Unreal. So this is pretty much all the work we do inside of the engine as a technical animator to get these monsters set up. Also, just another quick disclaimer. Most of my career has been inside the Unreal Engine, starting from Unreal 3 all the way to Unreal 5. So a lot of the terms I'll use might be very Unreal heavy, but I'll try to explain things a little agnostically, so that way, for those who are maybe building their first monster game in Unity, they'll know, they can use these same ideas and principles. So to break it back down, I know I mentioned it at the start of the presentation, but I'll do it again just in case anybody forgot, which is animation state logic, locomotion systems, animation post-process systems, procedural animation systems, cloth simulations, and rigid bodies simulations. So let's get started. This is the animation state logic. So animation state logic is really important. We generally hook up gameplay code and functionality with it. Basically, the idea behind it is a gameplay engineer will write some code that pushes out a Boolean, a float, an integer, an EM, and then I grab it and throw it inside of an animation state machine. Cool thing is state machines exist both in Unity and Unreal. So if you made up avatars and create up some fun animation state machines, you're pretty much good to go in Unreal as well. And yes, the image above is a state machine I built just for Furality. That is gameplay code I made just for Furality. Very simple one. It just goes from idle to idle break. Nothing too crazy. Sorry, just loading up the next slide. Okay, next is the locomotion system. This is probably the bread and butter of technical animators when they're inside of the engine. Just like rigging is like rigging is the bread and butter of technical animators DCC side. Locomotion system is the bread and butter inside the engine for technical animators doing their animtech work. You can see here, there's the Wraith. That is actually the locomotion. I actually animated this for Dead by Daylight. This was the original Wraith animation, though I think they changed it recently. But yeah, that is the locomotion system. And generally, there's like two schools of thought with locomotion systems. You're either going to work with a blend space system, which is just a simple graph that has two inputs in them, generally speed or direction. Very straightforward, very nice. And then there's like the new kid on block that everybody loves, which is trajectory-based locomotion or motion matching system. And that is very nice, very pretty. But, you know, it has its costs. It has its, just like all things in game development, you have your pros and cons. So let's start with the blend spaces. So if you're building out your monster or your character, here we have a character, for example, you know, nice little mannequin. A nice easy one to get started with is blend spaces. They are consistent. They are reliable. They're kind of like the industry standard for a long, long time now. They're very quick to set up. Every one of those little dots inside of that graph there is an animation, is a directional locomotion and speed as well. And generally, these blend spaces just need to float information in. They only need to know really is the speed you're going in and the direction you're going in. And then they can kind of interpolate between each cycle animation. Again, this is like a tried and true method. It's super clean. You just need a few cycles to get it working, honestly, like a few run cycles, and you pretty much are good to go. And computation-wise, it's probably the lightest system you can use right now. So if you have a game and you're worried about performance, blend spaces are really, really easy for that. Downside to them, of course, is that they don't handle other states very well in your locomotion system. So if you have a monster that like needs a big takeoff time, you know, they're lunging around, blend spaces might have a hard time with that. You're going to have to create a unique state logic just for those starts and stops, pivoting, turning. It doesn't really handle those type of things very well. So you'll have to create a very complex state machine for that. Also, it doesn't necessarily always pick the best animation or foot placement. So you'll have to do like play with play rate dynamics or some sort of extra procedural system to make sure that the feet are well planted on the ground and, you know, they're not sliding around. Next is motion matching. Now, this is the new hot kid on the block. Everybody loves motion matching or trajectory-based locomotion. And basically what this one does, it just evaluates the capsule movement in the world, trying to get direction and velocity, create a predicted trajectory on where it's going to go. And then it runs through a large database of animations to select the best pose based on your current movement and speed and direction. Now, this is really great because it handles a lot of those complex states that I was mentioning just right out the gate. You can just throw in all your stops, all your pivots, all your turning, all into one massive database, and the trajectory system can generally solve for that. Now, the downside about this is it does require a lot of animations, and I mean a lot. Like, I think like the basis to get starting to have something looking really smooth is like some 500 animations. But it looks really, and also you got to make sure those animations are clean and are consistent with each other because, you know, garbage in, garbage out. There's nothing you can do about that. But it does give some of the best looking results. I mean, it was used in games like Last of Us 2. It was started in For Honor, and the results just can't be argued with. And what's really nice is now they're native systems inside of Unreal. So before you'd have to, you know, write a lot of code to get it working, now they're just native systems inside of Unreal and Unity. So you can get started with motion matching today. And let's take a look at some of those examples, shall we? So here's some examples of motion matching. You can see here, I hope it's coming up clear on screen, those mannequins running around, or a little test gym I built just for Furality. And they're actually showing the predictive trajectory. So they are picking the best pose for whatever the best trajectory is that current character is going in. And we also used it for Alien Rogue Incursion, the xenomorphs, because obviously they can go over walls, run on walls, run on the ceiling, traverse basically over everything. So we actually had to use a motion matching system. We actually used a bit of a blend of traditional systems with motion matching to work out the best performance we could with the xenomorphs. So, that's a little bit of example of a motion matching system right there. All right. Next is post-process. So I talked about locomotion, and I talked about state logic, but now we're going to talk about, the little bit of extra, the little bit of glitter that we put on top of animation systems, and that is post-processing systems. So this is like a layer that lives after you're done with animation systems. It's another animation system that basically handles things like RBF, or it handles runtime retargeting systems or rigid body dynamics. And basically, these are things that need to make the character feel that much more believable, but aren't really influenced by gameplay logic. So that's why it's a post-process system. One of them is the runtime retargeting. So runtime retargeting is awesome. I love it. Basically, it ensures that you don't need massive animation data sets if you have a lot of characters, as it will take the animation data set, evaluate the current character bind pose position, and with IK goal effectors, readjust those animations correctly to your new character's body proportions. We can see here on this run cycle, the character in the trench coat has no animations. There's no animations associated with that character. Only that mannequin has the animations, and they are at runtime retargeting to the other character. As you can see here, it looks pretty good. It looks pretty seamless. They're stepping in tandem with each other. Everything feels good. And none of the body proportions feel crushed. They don't feel bad. You don't have arms going inside of the body. So, looking pretty good. And generally, this is used when you have a large category of characters, right? You have a lot of characters, and you don't want your animation size to get too big. You don't want to have to author 1 million animations for all the characters. So this basically helps reduce the file size so games don't get too big. Of course, though, it does come at a computation cost. So, you don't want to have 300 characters walking around on screen at one time using runtime retargeting. That can get a little heavy. All right. Next thing for procedural animation system, which I mentioned on the DCC side, but we're going to get deeper into it now, is procedural animation systems. This is math driving movement. And this does things such as kinematic systems. So this is where I was talking about in that first slide where it's like, oh, you're going to be learning math. Here we get into it now. So it does things like FK, IK, fabric, which has nothing to do with cloth. The acronym is deceiving. Foot planting, RBFs, or radio bias function. Don't worry, I will get more into that later. And automated locomotion systems. And I'll be honest, this is my favorite part. This right here is probably my favorite work to do as a technical animator. So, kinematic systems. We own them. We love them. We use them all the time in VR chat. It's how we get our full body working here. This is using a system called inverse kinematics, but the more common one, that's the base system of all armatures, is forward kinematics. Forward kinematics basically just means the child is going to follow the parent point position in the matrix information. So, I can't really demonstrate it now because I'm in full IK, but if I were to rotate the shoulder, basically that means the hand will follow along with it. That's forward kinematics in its simplest explanation. Inverse kinematics is the inverse of that. Basically, the child is driving the parent position or the in-between of that. So basically, that's how we get our arms working. That's how we get our legs working. We have effector goals that are help driving that. That's inverse kinematics. And then there's fabric, which is forward and backwards reaching inverse kinematic. That is a tongue twister, but that basically just means that it's basically IK, but allows for more joints in between to deform more smoothly. This is great if you have a character with that's like a tentacle or prayer digi legs. It is a very powerful tool, and computation-wise, it's much simpler to run than like a really complex IK chain. Okay, foot planting. This is the one that will really sell your monster or any character in your favorite video game. foot planting does a number of things. It handles basically environmental terrain. So if your character is running up slopes, if they are going over stairs, if they're going over rocky terrain, this is where you see in games where the feet are kind of auto-adjusting. And that is really critical to help make your monster feel kind of like well planted in the world, that they feel like they're really, really there. You can also do other things too, like actually evaluate the metadata inside your character's animations and lock the feet into world position. It can send out a raycast and using that animation data to evaluate to ensure the feet are firmly planted in the ground. And of course, this is also relying on IK systems, hence why we had to explain what IK systems were. And it is a very, very useful tool. Here we have an example of it. This is an IK foot planting system. I hope that's coming up clearly. The white circles that are appearing at the bottom of the feet, that's actually evaluating the metacurve data of the locomotion. So when those white little circles appear around the feet will not slide, they won't move. It helps keep the feet well planted. And then you can see by the end, when he goes up the stairwell there, we'll wait for it to cycle back around, but when they go up the stairwell, the feet are just kind of auto-adjusting to the top. And I don't know why it's cutting it short now, it seems. Well, there was a moment where it was at the top of the stairwell, and the feet were adjusting to the train. You'll just have to believe me. Oh, there it is. There it is. Perfect. Okay. So there we go. You can see there the feet are auto-adjusting to the stairwell. Didn't need to make it. Okay, so that's enough about foot planting. Let's talk about RBFs. RBFs are basically systems. We build them in DCC and in the engine. And they're basically ways to preserve the volume mesh of your character. These are systems that like twist joints that make sure that your wrists don't candy wrap while they're rotating. They make sure they keep volume in the shoulders. But they're used for a lot of different systems. And they're a little more, they're like SDKs or set-driven keys, but a little more complex. They can handle multitude of different set positions, and they manage a lot of different blend shapes. I could talk a lot about it, but I think it's better just to show it. So here's an example of an RBF face. This is a system of a series of different SDKs and blend shapes. And the controllers here on the screen are driving that face, helping preserve the volume, creating the wrinkles as the mouth moves around. This is actually a really nice RBF system. It's running off MetaHuman, if anybody's familiar with that. But these type of systems are used everywhere inside of your games. It helps keep, if you like when Kratos is pulling the axe out of a victim and you see those shoulders, muscles creasing around, that's an RBF system. You see biceps flex in your games, that's an RBF system. A lot of things utilize RBF system. It helps preserve the volume, helps create the believability that you're seeing a real monster or a real character in front of you. It's really, really good. But it does have a downside. It is a little bit heavier than SDKs, and it's a lot to set up. So your technical animator will have to spend a lot of time curating it, getting it just right. But, let's be honest, that end result, it's worth it. Okay, let's talk about automated locomotion systems. So this is a really, really fun subject, and this is kind of like a big R&D rabbit hole for me. I can talk a lot about this, but I'll try not to because we still have more stuff in the panel. So with automated locomotion systems, basically this is just like math. When I mentioned before math driving movement, this is a lot of it right here. This handles things like leaning of the body, if your character needs extra bounce, like if they're injured in the game, some sort of status effect. Rather than asking animators to like author all these animations, we can drive it mathematically with procedural animation systems and, of course, utilizing different IKs. And if you get really into it, like I have, you will actually use it to animate entire locomotion systems. So, for example, the facehugger from Alien Rogue Incursion, when it's locomoting around the game, is 100% procedurally animated. The tail is using a rigid body system, and the legs are using an IK system that does a ray cast on the ground. And as its body capsule gets displaced far enough, the legs will lift, pick up, and put down. Though I know there's a very special community here in VR chat that knows exactly what I'm talking about. And here's an example of it. So here's an example from Aliens Rogue Incursion. You can see there the facehugger is running around jumping. That is 100% procedurally driven. No, though, just for clarity, not all of it's procedurally driven. If those who have played Alien Rogue Incursion, if you're familiar with the second act, I won't spoil it because it's pretty fun. But if you're familiar with that second act, that is 100% crafted by our very talented animators who made that sequence. So that is still hand keyed. So procedural's good, but it can't handle everything. And then you can see there that little battle tank walking around. That's also 100% procedurally driven. There's no keyframes on that. That is evaluating the same way I explained before. We create a little ray cast on those feet. And basically, as the body capsule gets displayed far enough, it reaches a certain point, and then it just kind of lifts up and puts back down. It is a lot of fun to do, and I highly recommend it. Like exploring, playing with it. I see Final OK. Yep, Final OK does have it. So, yep. And it's a lot of fun. Okay, next is cloth simulation. So with cloth simulation, this is like vertex-driven animation. So this is basically some sort of physics system applying onto cloth systems. It helps create a level of believability. There's generally 3 schools of thought with this, or 3 methodologies. You have geometric method, which is basically every vertice is kind of dynamically influencing another vertice. It creates like a lanyard system. Next is a physics-based property, which takes into account of gravity and things like that, which creates a little more of a believable cloth system. And then there is the particle/energy system, which also takes in. So the difference really between physics and the particle system is one does local component solving and one does global solving. So basically, the physics/particle system is probably going to create you the most realistic looking cloth, but it's also the heaviest computation-wise because it's taking things like velocity dampening into account. Unreal uses Chaos Cloth currently in Unreal 5. It's a little bit of a hybrid method. It uses both the physics and particle system. And fun fact, for Dead by Daylight, going back to the Spirit. You'll see I have a favorite here. It's the Spirit. If anybody wants to know what my favorite one to work on of all time, it was the Spirit. So for the Spirit, funny enough, so when I was working on the game and was bringing the Spirit to life, we didn't have Fake Chaos Cloth at the time. We were actually still using NVIDIA's physics cloth system, which is a pure physics system. It doesn't use the more advanced particle system. And we had a lot of fun with it. We actually really experimented a lot with her cloth system. So her body is using like just general cloth properties, but her hair, I don't know if it's coming up clearly in the video, but her hair is running a cloth system where we actually reverse the gravity on it to create a bit of like an underwater feel. You know, the art direction really wanted it to feel like she had fallen into water and she was kind of ethereal, still floating in it. So, you know, we inverse the gravity on her hair, put a little bit of cloth sim on it, and increase the dampening a lot, and to create a very cool floaty effect. I love this outfit a lot. Okay, so that's cloth sim. Let's get into rigid body simulation now. So rigid body simulation generally helps with like 3 things. We have physicalized animation systems. This is really good for like impacting, hitting, you know, doing dynamic animation hits. We have ragdoll, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with ragdoll. And then we have rigid body nodes, which is basically like the physics cloth, like, you know, like the tail wiggling here. Like if you do VR chat physics or Unity physics, you'll know the rigid body system. And basically, this is just a system that kind of runs on top of animation systems. So we have an example here of rigid bodies in action. So we can see here on the example for the xenomorphs, we use physicalized animation systems to basically simulate impacts because we didn't want to ask our animators to, like, you know, do a bunch of hitting, do a bunch of shaking and stuff like that. Also, the tail is a physicalized animation system on the xenomorph, so that way it could detect the crowd and stuff. Or, sorry, not the crowd, detect the environment as it's slinking around and things like that. And we also, the mannequins here, for example, are doing a nice demonstration. We're using physicalized animation systems where they have a general locomotion running. And you can see their limbs start to droop as the slider gets turned on, as things become a little more physical. I'll say that word a lot, I apologize. And next is ragdoll. I mean, I know I said you all know ragdoll, but I figured I should show it for the panel. So we have ragdoll here. And basically, you know, that's just used when a character dies. The 2 examples here at the bottom are actually examples I made just for you, Furality. That's on the left is the orange mannequin is me setting it up, previewing it and testing it. And on the right is the execution of it. I actually have a little code command, a little keyboard kit I hit to execute that ragdoll. Honestly, ragdoll is a lot of fun. And it saves animators so much headache trying to author a million death animations. So ragdoll is pretty dang useful. Okay, and that has been my presentation. We are now in the Q&A section. It looks like I have 20, I've actually ended 20 seconds extra for the Q&A, so you have an extra 20 seconds from what I had planned for my Q&A. So if there's any questions, anything you're dying to know about how to make your monsters move in your favorite games, or maybe you want me to answer a question of a game you're working on, now's the time to ask.
Ooh. And currently there are a couple questions in Discord.
All right.
So just a couple quick technical ones. So somebody's asking, Low Poly Bunny in Discord is asking if there's any technical differences between technical animation and character animation. And if so, what would they be?
Yes. Okay. So character animation, which is actually where I started out in my career, I was a character animator. Generally, you're going to be working with keyframes, whether that's hand authoring the keys or working with mocap data. You're generally actually just like crafting the movement and trying to create the believability of life. I mean, that's what animation means. It means to give life. A technical animator is creating the tools and systems to make those animations get authored faster or create more believability in them inside of the engine. So it's like one is like a pure art and the other is like a mix of art and science.
Right.
Well, animation's kind of science too. You have to know how bodies move. But you understand what I'm saying.
Right. And then we have another question from Zodiz on Discord as well. What are your thoughts on incorporation of motion caption to the animation pipeline? Do you find good use in it? Are there times when it's better not to use it? What are your thoughts?
I find motion capture can be very useful. It really kind of comes down to what is the scope and scale of your game and like the type of art direction you're trying to achieve with it. So if you're working on a massive game that has lots of characters and you want it to be hyper believable, mocap is your best friend. I mean, being able to put on a suit, I've worn mocap suits myself, and like jump around and author a bunch of animations is really, really good. I like mocap. But I've also, like Dead by Daylight, I did a lot of hand key authoring of animations. And hand key is really good if you're trying to get a very stylized look, or you're maybe working in tighter constraint budgets. Like, I don't want to tell people like mocap is like a requirement, because it's not. Hand key animating is still perfectly viable and can create a lot of beautiful animations in games. I mean, I love to hand key animations, but I can't deny about the speed of mocap. Mocap just is really good about getting a lot of data really quickly.
Gotcha. Jag in the Discord chat's also questioning, when it comes to procedural IK like foot planning, how do you account for edge cases and prevent the feet from, say, planting on the table next to the character instead of on the floor?
That is a great question. So I can talk very in-depth about this from an Unreal perspective, so I apologize if this doesn't necessarily apply in Unity. But what you're going to want to do is you definitely want to set up trace channels. Those are your best friends in Unreal. Setting up trace channels is basically a way of saying, hey, when my foot is doing a raycast to figure out like what I should be planting to, these are the specific like items I want to stick to. So you can actually tell like the table, for example, to be like, hey, don't even bother raycasting to me. My character collision capsule will block me from entering that table, but the raycast will completely ignore it, preventing the foot like getting up on the table. Another good way is just making sure the raycast is of a good volume size. So you want to make sure it's as big as like radius wise as large as your foot, but never goes beyond the character capsule unless you're pointing down. I mean, like it can go down pretty far if you're pointing down, especially if your character's on a ledge that's pretty high up and you want them to kind of like balance on one foot on the ledge. Then you can, and you can just play around with the raycasting, but trace channels, those are your best friend, especially if you're working in Unreal. I'm sorry, I don't know what they are in Unity though. I wish I could remember what they were called.
You're good. We have a couple people asking here between what your favorite model to work on was and like what the most complex thing you've ever done was.
Okay, so my favorite model I ever worked on, I did really love the Spirit. Like, I know I said that a lot. The Spirit was a lot of fun, and it had so many technical challenges to it with like the floaty limbs, the floaty legs, the gash. That was really, really hard. But I think the hardest one I ever worked on was probably the Demigorgon when we had the Stranger Things tie-in. And that's just because we had to create a system where, like, for those who don't know, Demigorgon's power was like to crawl into the ground and then crawl out on the other side, like basically goes into the upside down. And the designer wanted power-ups that could speed that process up. but it could get a little cartoony goofy for the third person view, so basically for the survivors. So we had to come up with a system that basically allowed for this, and the solution was to create a duplicate. Like basically while the digging was starting, there was a duplicate one started that would like play at like at adjusted play rates, but not too crazy for the third person view. And it was the same thing for the other one when it came out. And they had to, both of them as they was coming in and out, like the real Demogorgon player and the duplicate, had to sync up perfectly over the replication of the server. So coming up with the technical challenges to solve for that. And it was the same thing for the Spirit. The Spirit actually has the duplications as well. And trying to get Clothsim to behave across all duplications of the instance of the character is a nightmare. It is so hard, especially when you're working with like physics cloth back in the day, because it didn't have proper server replication.
I can't find who asked it right now, but I do have somebody asking, if somebody were to get started, like where, if we just wanted to get into this.
All right, so if you want to get started, I would recommend start with like character animating. Start playing around with character rigs, start animating with them. It's how I got started. And that gave me a really good foundation to start getting into the technical work. Now, if you don't want to animate and you're like, I just want to get into the technical work, I would start on the DCC side, download Blender, watch some tutorials online about how to make rigs, and start building out character rigs. If you're really excited about game engine stuff, then I would say download Unity or Unreal. They're free. They're 100% free to download and play around with. And there's a lot of really good tutorials and even great example projects. Download an example project off Fab and literally just start reverse engineering it. Try to take it apart, break it. Like, take it apart, break it, and then figure out how to put it back together and get it working again. That is a really good place to start.
Gotcha. All right, we have another question here from Dragon Shark asking, is there an optimization pass for animations? Right now, animations in VR chat get kind of big, and the people would like to have kind of like pointers on how to make animations a bit more performant.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, the best way to make animation performant, like the biggest thing, like when I was in the beginning showing that state machine systems and trace tracks, like for your animations, are some of the heaviest things you can do for animation aspect. So getting them compressed down to one big animation state machine for VR chat is a great way to optimize it. If you're using VRC Fury, you're actually already doing that. VRC Fury takes assets and kind of puts them down into one animation system. So that helps a lot. Those are like the two main things. And I see we only have a few seconds left, so I think that'll be good for that one. If we can fit one more question in.
Gotcha. And and somebody asked earlier, if somebody wanted to get a foot into the industry, where would you get them started?
Okay. If you want to get a foot in the industry, I would recommend first, like, try to join up with game jams. Even if you don't know necessarily what you're doing, like, I mean, just be honest, being like, hey, I want to join a game jam, but I don't know where I'm even going. Just being able to shadow somebody helps a lot. Start experimenting, like download Blender, download Unreal, download Unity, download some example projects, start taking them apart, and start building a portfolio. The biggest thing you can do to get in is to create an online portfolio demonstrating your work and then, showing it out to future studios. It's all about that portfolio.
All right. I believe that's all we have time for today.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, Furality, for sticking around and watching me.